There are stories that are told, and there are others that are written in the dark recesses of the human heart, stories that are not meant to be heard, but to be lived. The stories told are those that take place in the limelight, those that we talk about by the fire, that we listen to between two silences and that we close like a book once they are told. But the stories lived in the shadows, in the intimacy of unshared moments. These stories are invisible. They are forged in pain, solitude, and what is left unsaid. Amina was one of them. That of Amina begins in a place where the light seems to have abandoned all hope. A place where time itself seems to have stopped, like a curse that weighs on every element of the landscape. The farm where she lived was a reflection of her own existence. A building once full of promise, now eaten away by the ravages of abandonment. The roof, decomposed and weakened by the seasons, bore the marks of thousands of storms, both physical and emotional. The rain had dug deep cracks in the walls of the house, and the almost unbearable smell of damp earth mingled with that of mold, invading every corner. Every room seemed devoid of life, every window broken like a stair into space. Only a few pale lights filtered through the broken windows, making the light drearier, more ghostly, almost as if hope itself could no longer feed on this fading light. In this oppressive world of solitude and silence, Amina, 32, found herself isolated. She was far from the woman she had been, this young woman full of dreams and ambitions, self-confidence and faith in the future. She had married David, believing that love and promises of shared happiness would lead them to a better future. A bright future, far from the difficulties of her youth, far from the poverty and injustices she had known. But reality as it stood today seemed anything but a dream come true. She found herself there, alone, with her 5 chickens, her only companions. Tiny creatures, almost invisible in this vast universe, but which, in a way, would still anchor him to this world, as a final proof that life could still persist, even in a place like this. David, the man she had loved and who had promised her a bright future, had become a shadow. A businessman ever more absorbed by his desires for power and wealth, had brought her here after their marriage, but very quickly, everything he had promised her slipped away like sand through his fingers. He had sworn to her that this farm was temporary, that they would eventually leave, find their place elsewhere. But he wouldn't come back again. One morning, without warning, he left. Not a word, not an explanation. He had left it there, like an old dress you throw away without thinking about it, without caring what it meant. This absence of gesture, of word, of reason, marked the beginning of a long journey into incomprehension. Amina didn't understand why he left. She never saw this sudden departure coming. He had taken what he had wanted, her love, her youth, her trust, and walked away as if it had never mattered. How could this man she had married, who had sworn loyalty to her, abandon her in such isolation, without a backward glance, without even a goodbye? She was alone now, and the farm was a cruel gift. A gift from fate, or perhaps from David himself, like an ending that no one wanted to write but that everyone had helped to achieve. The sound of the wind in the trees and the gentle lapping of the pond water were her only company, and she didn't even know whether to accept them as friends or enemies. The chickens, his only confidants, gradually became his partners in the silent fight against depression, emptiness, the slow erosion of his spirit. Amina remembered before, the neighboring town where she had grown up. She remembered the busy streets, the people calling her name, the looks filled with respect and admiration. She was seen as a strong woman, a capable woman, a woman who moved forward despite obstacles. But here, in this abandoned farm, she felt like another person, like a version of herself that only existed in distant memories. She was no longer the one the town knew. She had become the shadow of a woman she herself had forgotten. Every morning was a new battle against forgetting, against the temptation to let ourselves be swallowed up by the darkness of solitude. Every day, she fought not to sink into resignation. The neighbors were far away, too far away to offer him any real help. The rare times they showed up, it was often to offer food or words of pity. They did not dare enter the farm, avoiding getting too close, as if Amina's presence here was a mark of dishonor, an error that had to be ignored. Their piercing gaze, both curious and reproachful, haunted her. She knew what they thought of her, a black woman without resources, without status, abandoned on a farm that, in the eyes of many, should have remained where it was, deserted, abandoned, worthless. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Time moved forward without Amina being able to really grasp the thread. Every morning she woke up with the same weight on her chest, a mixture of loneliness and determination. She had never imagined living such an existence, isolated from the world, relegated to a dilapidated farm that felt more like a prison than a home. Yet she refused to give up. The first weeks after David's departure had been the hardest. The silence of the house weighed on him like a condemnation. She heard only the sound of the wind whistling through the cracks in the windows, the scratching of chickens in the yard, and the crunch of her own footsteps on the worn wood of the floor. But little by little, she had learned to tame this isolation, to make it a strength rather than a burden. Every morning, she got up before dawn, breathing deeply in the cold, damp air. She fed her chickens, took care of them as one takes care of the only souls ready to listen. She fixed what could be fixed, a rickety door, a fence that was threatening to collapse, a roof that was letting the rain filter through. Every gesture, every effort, reminded her that she was much more than an abandoned woman. She was not just a ghost wandering in a forgotten place in the world. Amina was a survivor. Despite everything, the shadows of the past haunted her. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, she would wake up with a start, convinced that she heard the sound of a car in the driveway. But there was never anything. Only the oppressive silence of the sleeping countryside. And in those moments, she thought of David, of his empty promises, of his charming smile which had made her believe in a better life. She wondered why he had left her alone in this place she had never chosen. She fought against these thoughts, refusing to give them more power than they deserved. She focused on the present moment, on the earth beneath her feet, on the sky which changed color as the hours passed. The farm, despite its miserable appearance, had become his battlefield. And she intended to win it. Until one day something changed. That morning, while Amina was collecting eggs in the henhouse, she saw a figure in the distance. A foreign presence in this landscape where she no longer expected anyone. His heart sank slightly, a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. The man approached slowly, his footsteps kicking up small clouds of dust on the dirt road. He was a young man, a farmer from the area. We called him Theo. Amina had already heard her name through the whispers of the few neighbors. He was a little different, too. Some found him strange, too quiet, too independent. But he had a reputation as a man of his word, someone who worked hard and was not burdened by the judgments of others. When he was close enough, he stopped and nodded to her. "You look like you need help," he said simply. Amina stared at him without responding immediately. She didn't like the idea of being seen as a woman in distress. However, something in Theo's voice made him understand that he was not there out of pity. He had not come to save her, but perhaps to share a piece of the weight she carried alone. After a silence, she replied in a calm, almost defiant tone. "I never asked to be saved. But if you'll help me, I might be able to teach you something. The land is not only a question of work, it is also a question of spirit." A fleeting smile crossed Theo's face. He nodded slowly. He understood. From that day on, something changed in Amina's daily life. Theo came regularly, sometimes bringing tools, other times advice. He taught him how to strengthen the fence, how to dig channels to prevent water from stagnating in the garden. In exchange, Amina showed him how to take care of the chickens, how to recognize good soil from exhausted soil. They worked together in silence, in a complicity that did not need words. Little by little, the farm came back to life. Amina planted vegetables, aromatic herbs, and even flowers, as a challenge to the harshness of the world. The chickens multiplied, the eggs became more numerous. She sometimes sold her products at the local market, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was building something that was truly hers. But despite this rebirth, a shadow continued to hang over her. Memories of David didn't disappear so easily. There remained this invisible silhouette which haunted the place, this name which she avoided pronouncing, even in her thoughts. She wondered if he still thought about her, if he regretted it, or if he had simply erased her from his memory. And then, one day, while she was working under a scorching sun, the sound of an engine broke the calm of the countryside. Amina stood up, wiping the sweat from her forehead. She slowly turned towards the entrance to the farm and saw a car that she knew too well. A car that should never have come back here. The door opened and a man got out. It was David. He had come back. He was back, but he was not alone. His appearance no longer had anything of the confident and dominant David of old. His shoulders were hunched, his features marked by fatigue and perhaps remorse. Yet, in his eyes, there was still this glimmer of arrogance, as if he still believed that a few words would be enough to erase everything. He stopped a few steps from her, observing the farm he had once left abandoned. There was change everywhere. The chickens were pecking freely, the vegetable garden was overflowing with vegetables, flowers were blooming along the fence. The air smelled of damp earth and worked wood. It was a vibrant place, steeped in work and resilience. A place that no longer had anything to do with the ghost of the past that he hoped to find. "Amina," he said in a trembling, almost hesitant voice. "I'm sorry. I didn't know how to appreciate what I had. But look at everything I've accomplished." He gestured to the car behind him, a shiny vehicle, a symbol of material success. He wore expensive clothes, a flashy watch. Outward signs of wealth that he still thought were enough to impress. "Come with me," he continued, like a plea disguised as a command. "Come back." Amina stared at him for a long time, looking for a sincerity in his eyes that she knew she wouldn't find there. Memories flooded in, the days of silence, the nights of anguish, the humiliation of being abandoned like a useless burden. He had believed that she would be unable to survive without him. He had thought she would wait for him, broken, grateful for his return. But he knew nothing about the woman in front of him. "No, David," she replied, her voice calm but firm. "I won't come back. Not to you." A heavy silence settled. The birds continued to sing. The wind blew gently through the leaves of the trees, as if nature itself was laughing at this scene. "The woman you abandoned no longer exists," she continued. "I found my strength here on this farm, with these chickens, with this land. What you destroyed, I rebuilt, stone by stone, day by day. And you have no place in what I have become." David blinked, as if the words didn't make sense. He opened his mouth, closed it, before letting out a nervous laugh. "Do you really think this little piece of land is a victory?" he asked, his tone wavering between disbelief and irritation. "You deserve better, Amina. You deserve comfort, luxury. You're not going to spend your life raising chickens and growing vegetables, are you?" Amina smiled, not in mockery, but in certainty. "Comfort, David? Luxury?" She looked around the farm before looking back at him. "It wasn't money that saved me. It was the earth under my feet, the sweat on my forehead, and the freedom of no longer waiting for a man to tell me who I am or what I deserve." He looked away, as if he couldn't bear the truth that was being imposed on him. He had hoped for an easy pardon, a triumphant return. But instead of the docile woman he had known, he found a queen crowned by her own victories. David took a step back, searching for something to say, one last card to play. But he knew, deep down, that he had lost. Not just Amina, but the illusion that he had any control over her. "Good luck then," he murmured before turning on his heel. Amina watched him leave without regret. There was no more anger in her, no more sadness. Only a deep certainty. She was at home, finally, in her own life. Over time, Amina and Theo transformed the farm into a prosperous place. It was not just a place to cultivate the land, but a refuge for those seeking to rebuild their own dignity. Families from the village came to seek food, work, and even advice from Amina. She became a respected figure, not because she was saved, but because she had the courage to save herself. And in her heart, she knew one thing. David's abandonment had never been an end. This was the beginning of his true freedom.